With that said, at any time, drop your questions in the chat below, or if anything is resonating with you, we are here for that. We are going to have a Q&A at the end as well, so some time to get some FaceTime with Janet. But again, we're more about connecting y'all with Janet and making sure we could learn a lot. So with that said, we want to welcome everyone to our first Provar Community event, and could not think of someone better to have it with than Janet Gregory. Before we introduce Janet Gregory and the topic of the conversation today, we want to thank everyone for tuning in live and also for watching this recording. These types of community continuous learning opportunities would not be able to happen without Provar. So thank you so much to Provar. If you are interested in learning more about how to scale your Salesforce test automation, we highly encourage you to go and check us out online. We'll be sure to drop in a link after we get started. We also have some more continuous learning opportunities coming your way. Micah, Agile Tester, and front-end developer is going to be coming in on November 23rd. So we'll drop that in as well. And in the spirit of continuous learning here in the Provar community, we also just relaunched University of Provar on a brand new platform with new courses and electives. So if you've ever kind of been curious about how to upskill your Salesforce test automation knowledge, we will drop that link in the chat. With that said, today's topic of conversation, marketing hat off, today's topic of conversation is a leadership guide to holistic testing and DevOps. Some key takeaways we're going to unpack today with Janet, our speaker, is how to identify and increase visibility for organizational testing risks, strategies for implementing and scaling internal buy-in to a holistic testing approach, and critical issues in transitioning to a sustainable holistic testing and resolution strategies for you and your teams. So for those of you that don't know Janet, I know, shocker, living under a rock, but we're here for it. So Janet Gregory is an agile testing coach and process consultant with DragonFire Incorporated. She's the co-author of Lisa Crispin with Agile Testing Condensed, a brief introduction, which has been translated in multiple languages now. More agile testing, learning journeys for the whole team, and agile testing, a practical guide for testers and their teams. All available online. Janet specializes in showing agile teams how testing activities are necessary for the whole team to develop quality products. She works with teams to transition to an agile development and teaches agile testing courses worldwide. We're going to drop her information as well for anyone who's not following her on social media. And her and Lisa Crispin, who we love, both co-founded the Agile Testing Fellowship to grow a community of practitioners who care about quality. We're going to drop that link in below. Janet, you've done a lot. How was that intro?
I was just thinking that I'm going to have to hire you to introduce me all the time. No.
Oh, anytime, all the time, Janet, anytime. With that said, let me go ahead and make sure that we give you permission so we can get you to go ahead.
Yep. I'll share my screen.
Magical.
There we go. All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. And after all of that, the expectations are set so high, it makes me a little bit nervous, but let's do this. All right. So I just want to tell a little bit more about me, not so much all of that stuff that Tristan said, but it helps to understand where I'm coming from. I started as a programmer. I did that for about 6 years. And then my manager at the time approached me and said, "Hey, Janet, you're the only programmer who is constantly bugging us about quality and about process. How would you like to be our QA manager?" So with that, I started a whole new career and really never looked back. Now, I found that it didn't work so well being a QA manager for that particular company because they really had no interest in changing what they were doing at all, no matter how I tried. So I actually left that company and I ended up being lucky enough to get into an agile team as a tester, kind of one of those pivotal moments in life. So as I worked with that first team, I really changed how I thought about software development. What worked before wasn't working anymore. I had to learn how to convince people to change what they were doing, though I know now you cannot convince anybody, but I got better at it. And I started speaking and consulting, sharing my message with other people. And of course, I, co-authored those 3 books that Tristan just mentioned. But enough about me. What I want to say is my background, my focus has pretty much always been on quality and by side effect testing. When I talk about leaders, because that's the title, it's in the title, there's lots of different levels. Today, when I say leaders or leadership, I probably mean the top 2 levels, the executive or middle management. However, I want to remind each one of you that if you're not a leader by title, never underestimate your influence, because it's really, really important. You'll find yourself leading at lots of different ways and different times. I'm going to talk about cultural issues to start with, because that's what's going to drive much of this presentation. Then, of course, the bulk of it will be about the holistic testing and DevOps, and then where to start, how, who, all of those good things. When organizations try to create small improvements, and I encourage small improvements, right? But sometimes when they do it within one functional group, they might overlook the bigger issues and end up creating silos within a delivery team. I often say separate DevOps teams, because DevOps is a mindset. It's not a team. It can be a danger. It can create a different silo again, but not always if they work closely with the delivery teams. So you want to watch those sorts of things. Another thing to watch for is the information flow in an organization. Is it, top down only? Is there an easy way for information to flow upwards and be heard by the leaders? Are the changes determined by by water cooler or in the hallways, or lately on, instant messaging? Or does the whole team understand why something is happening? Cultural issues will show up when teams don't speak out, or sometimes they're afraid to try something new. Sometimes it's because they don't want to rock the boat, but sometimes it's because they are scared they will get blamed when they fail. Or sometimes team members are treated differently. For example, someone works a lot of overtime and they get rewarded. That sets expectations. And so you want to kind of watch for those sorts of things. And also when teams have the same process for every new feature, or the management treats every new project exactly the same, they'll often run into issues, because sometimes there's not enough digging into a new feature, or other times there might be too much process retrospective for others. So I encourage you, and we're going to look at the Cynefin model for a little bit. I'm not going to talk lots about it, but not all products are the same. Not all features are the same. Not all development is the same. They don't all require the same level of quality, or don't have the same risk. As testers, we can help identify those risks and help guide testing. But we need to get this message to our leaders. So we have to try to make it visible. And the first way is to start talking about it. For example, one tester on a team can't test everything, especially if it's a very complicated or complex situation. For example, the simple and obvious. Maybe you don't even need a tester on the team because it's something you've done over and over again, and it's just changing a little bit. Even good practices should be considered differently. For example, I'm a fan of acceptance test-driven development or behavioral-driven development, but it's great for complicated situations where we've done this kind of thing before. Not too many unknowns, but we can look at it, we know it. It's complicated, works perfect for that, but not so much in a complex situation where we don't even understand the problem area yet. And it's probably overkill for simple and obvious solutions. So as testers, we need to be able to articulate testing activities and why it makes sense here or not there. We need to think about these different aspects of it. The idea of DevOps was to encompass more than the whole team. It's a mindset, right? Many Agile teams, when they first adopted Agile, didn't really think about it, although many of us absolutely did and always had operations involved. Now, this is a pretty traditional picture of DevOps. And if you notice, it has a test phase. And the emphasis is kind of on the right side of this loop. Dan Ashby took that typical loop and changed it a little bit, took out the test piece of it, and really showed we test here and here and here. And this model works really well. It was one of my favorite models. It still is one of my favorite models, but I always felt there was something more. So I made a few more modifications to help think about it in a different way. So I put a little more emphasis on the understanding on the left-hand side. What are we building? Because if we don't know what we are building or why we are building it, or how fast we build it, if we build the wrong thing, it really doesn't matter. Now, there's no time associated with this loop. We might go fast through this cycle if the story is well known, or maybe we go slow if the functionality has lots of unknowns. So if we think about the journey starting at the beginning, the discovery phase, we'll continue right through that loop, right up until we get to that learning, observing and learning. What did our customers do? How can we apply it? How can we adapt it? This model doesn't really care whether you are looking at the big picture or the small individual chunks. I also put some pauses in it to show that we should stop and think. Those pauses are not meant to be quality gates. But for example, if we deploy something and it fails the smoke tests, maybe we should kind of go back and figure out what we did wrong. Because models work best if they're simple, I didn't put in any feedback loops because then it gets really messy. If we look at this a little bit closer, and I've called it holistic testing, because the word continuous testing kind of has been hijacked to mean automation. So I think about it, if we think about holistic, it means human-centric tests as well as the automation. Both are really important. Now, these examples here are testing activities. They don't talk about quality as a whole, which I think we need to talk about, and I'll touch on throughout the presentation. The testing activities at the beginning of the cycle, in the discovery and planning and understanding, are really about where we start to build quality into the system. Are we building the right thing? We get deeper into details as we progress. We start thinking about building. We get into the how. Maybe the programmers do a prototype or a proof of concept. Maybe we start writing high-level acceptance tests or exploring examples to get concrete definition of what we want. Once we get into that building stage, that's where testers and developers work really closely together, right? We're automating, we're testing as we go. Once we deploy, we kind of leave the area of story testing and more interested in the infrastructure, the quality attributes, such as load, performance, maybe recoverability, integration with other systems. Once we release into production, then we start testing in production. We observe what is our customer's usage, and the loop starts all over again based on what we learned. And we want to step in, we step out, looking at that whole big picture. So when I do an assessment on quality practices, and I do that quite often. I look at many aspects of quality. For example, the development approach, the culture, feedback loops, learning and improvement, code quality. But for today, I'm going to look at these three aspects of quality and testing. Quality ownership, the understanding, who participates, those sorts of things, the testing breadth. I'm a believer of having good testers involved in the team. But I also have seen teams without testers do a really good job. I can talk about that particular sentence for hours. If you ever want to, just let me know. But the testing capabilities need to be there, whether it's in a role or spread throughout the team. You still have to have that testing breadth. The third thing, the deployment pipeline, is important because it's about the infrastructure, the test environments, the automation. And for each of these, quality ownership, testing breadth, deployment pipeline, I'll start by getting you to look at where you are. I'll share some questions that might help you think about it. And then how we can start to look at where we move forward. How can we move? So we're going to start with quality ownership. So I put this on a sliding scale. If we think about it as an assessment, where does your team stand? Before you can improve, you need to know where you are now. You need to think about where you might want to be and what are the gaps in between. So if we think about quality and test ownership, if we think about a team that is just starting out, maybe they're in a chaotic kind of form, but they really want to get better. That's the beginning. That's what I'm calling the beginning. Teams, the quality is owned by the testers. They're the quality gatekeepers. I'm pretty sure many of us have been there, felt that, right? On the other end of the spectrum, those innovating teams, those high-performing teams, they feel the magic. They work together to build quality in from that very first aspect of discovery. And of course, there's lots of in-between steps. And I find that's where most teams are. It's not completely linear. Some practices might race ahead, others might stagnate. So perhaps your testers still own quality, but they're starting to pair more with the programmers on automation. So from a team perspective, trying to identify where you are, that's the idea of an assessment, and where you want to be and how to get there is the important thing. These are some example questions that I might ask to a team to so that I can understand how they think about quality or how they respond as a team. I often talk about coffee when I talk about quality. So as a consumer, I enjoy a good cup of coffee, although this is tea right now. I like a good cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar. I'll have a cappuccino once in a while, but that's not what I usually go for. Other people, however, really want that cappuccino. I judge coffee by the taste mostly. Some coffees I don't like because they're too bitter, but I rarely think about what goes into that cup of coffee. So we need to think about what level of quality we want. If you think about that coffee, is it good enough for your customers to provide a gas station kind of cup of coffee? Or do you want to deliver that perfect cappuccino with that pretty design in a coffee shop with, amazing ambiance and have a barista put that pretty design on? Who makes those decisions in your teams? Does the team decide? Or is it the product team that says feature delivery is the most important thing? We can fix bugs after. How do you determine what processes to use? Is it each person gets to decide if they do their own unit testing? Or is it a team, or maybe even organizational decision? Even questions like who responds to defects that are found in production might tell you if teams think about product quality, or really is it good enough to put it in production and now it's somebody else's job, somebody else's problem? So asking these kinds of questions get people to start talking about it. Now, if the answers to your questions show you are on that left side of the scale, the beginning, that your team really doesn't consider what quality means, I suggest you start by defining what you mean by product quality. Product, but also the goal. What is the purpose? What goes into the process? Who are the people that need to be involved? Think about that coffee. Process quality. What are the elevation you grow your beans at? Who picks the beans? When do they pick them? How do you roast them? The barista, does that barista properly trained? Right? So there's product, people, process. They all go into that quality conversation. When I go into teams, I find that a lot of processes that are used are because we've always done it that way. And it seems to work just fine. So why would we change? So when we start talking about quality and from product quality, we start looking at the processes from a team perspective. And it helps to start think about what processes would we want to change to get a better product quality. One question that I like to ask individuals to make them think is, how do they contribute to the product quality? By getting people to articulate how they contribute, sometimes it gets them to think about how it fits into the bigger picture. Sometimes it gets them to think about, could they be doing more? And I encourage people to make it a team discussion so that you can see how each person depends on others. But let's move on to testing breadth. That's a little more concrete and easier to focus on. So again, the sliding scale. Testing is done after, at the beginning part of it anyhow, the testing is done after coding is complete, or maybe close to completion. It's focused on the happy path, might be functionality, and often is based on what time is left. Been there, done that. Testers may be embedded in a team. They might be an independent test team. Testing is not applied in any strategic way. And the risks that might be considered are probably from the testers and maybe from an internal point of view of the system. Any other tests other than functional are probably created and performed sporadically. Probably if a customer, complains or your system goes down because the load is too heavy. The other end of the spectrum, the innovative teams, they take responsibility and accountability for aligning their strategy, their testing strategy, not only with their team, but with the wider organizational quality strategy. They plan together, they use different techniques depending on their context. They'll use a variety of heuristics usually, and they manage the risks, both to the release, to the customer, and to the business. Generally, I find teams, as normal, somewhere in the middle. Testers maybe know their role and what needs to be tested using heuristics, but they don't know how to articulate them. They don't know how to spread that knowledge to the rest of the team. As teams get stronger, testers may let go of that need to do all the testing and work with the team to make sure the tests get completed. So, where are you on the spectrum? I'm going to guess some practices are at the beginning and others are, somewhere else along the spectrum. Here are some example questions that I ask to a team. I want to look to see how the team does or knows what testing activities are important for a specific feature. I want to think about who does them. Is it shared or is it kind of one person? So I'm looking at a lot of different kinds of things. Sometimes the answers to the previous questions are different than what I'm observing. The people know the answers they should be giving, but aren't necessarily walking the talk. So sometimes I'll look at the results. Sometimes I'll do it in the form of a process retrospective. Sometimes by looking at the storyboard and seeing where the testing activities happen. Maybe even by looking at the bugs reported for each story. Are they found late in the cycle? Are they fixed right away, or do they wait for a long time? For example, maybe testing is late in the cycle. All the tests are performed by the testers, so bugs are reported late and they're fixed in a hardening iteration, or maybe during, that 3 regression testing. It's a lot of different information. It can tell me lots, but I often need to dig deeper. And so I encourage people to do that. Maybe the testers are waiting for multiple stories to be finished before they can test. That means that the developers wait for feedback for a long time and are likely on brand new stories before any bugs are reported. Or maybe the testers are really quick at giving feedback, but a lot of the bugs are actually ones that should have been found during unit testing. Maybe there's no automated tests, or maybe none at the API level, or, so all regression tests have to wait to the end. Most of the bugs are integration or load and performance. So looking at these kinds of things are important. I like to look at the bugs reported by the customer as well, because often that tells us that we might be missing really important concepts. And maybe we're not even understanding our customers at all. Too many times I hear, Janet, come fix our testers, or testing is falling behind, so we need more testers. And I find that the answer is not always we need more testers. In fact, most of the time, it is not the answer. So I encourage you to look at the real problem. Perhaps the programmers are coding and not doing any of their own testing, throwing it over the wall. So the answer, instead of getting more testers, is to train the programmers to test their own code first. Could be that the stories aren't testable. The answer would be start slicing the stories differently. It could be there's not enough automation, so the testers have to test and retest and spend their time ineffectively. The answer might be that the testers and programmers need to decide what to automate, what level to automate, and how to do it together. So look at the problem, not the symptom. Don't paint around the tree, as I like to say. So whole team testing to me is really, really important. So think about how the whole team can explore risks. Asking questions early, like what is the worst thing that can happen when we deploy? That will let the whole team consider what testing activities need to be built into the loop. Thinking about what quality attributes are important, security, accessibility, performance, thinking about them as constraints with every story. Can we codify that? Can the programmers put some hooks in to help us test load or stress? Make it a team problem. So sharing activities means learning, and it means spreading that knowledge. It might not mean that a programmer tests their own work alone, but maybe they can learn to test somebody else's with a testing hat on, right? Trying to get rid of bottlenecks, trying to make that whole team accountable. A red flag that I often see in teams is a testing task for each story that says, test this story. That makes it invisible. That makes all the testing activities invisible and nobody can help. So really try to make those activities visible. and really think about how you can do that so that people can help. One of my favorite things to do is, I call it show me. A developer says, hey, Janet, I'm finished coding this story. Can I show you? I'll go over, I'll pair with them. If I'm in person, I sit beside them. If we're remote, we share, right? We screen share. I like the programmer to walk through their code, to demo it. Tell me what they did. I will ask questions. Any bug we find, they can fix immediately. In fact, I like to pair with the programmer because then I understand how it was fixed and it builds trust. I can also do things like peer review. If I know the standards and I know some basic coding constructs of the code that's being used, I can peer review. I can sit with that programmer and we can walk through their code. There's lots of things that we can do to transition learning. And so sometimes it just takes that, what is it we can do? I mentioned earlier about looking at bugs reported by the customers. Are we missing some important concepts? Many times when we test in a bubble. Developers tend to look at the happy path, and I've often heard them say, no one will ever do it that way, right? As testers, we also have bubbles. We have personal biases. We get in habits. We test the same way each time. And some of the best ways to overcome that is by diversity. Sharing and working with others outside of our own bubble, learning different techniques for testing. The book here that I'm showing is one by Lena Weiberg, and she just put it out very recently. I love her take on different heuristics. They're ones that she uses when she's testing. And I think it's important to get to our bottom of our own biases, right? We all have them. And the last quality aspect I'm going to talk about today is the deployment pipeline. Check my time. Again, sliding scale. So on that beginning, when we think about test environments, sometimes testers don't know what data they have, or their test environments are really unstable and they can't count on them. If there's no automation, maybe if there is automation, maybe it runs on the same physical test environment where the testers do maybe exploratory testing, if they even do that, right? But that causes other issues like the unstable environments. Developers might work on features for months without merging back to the main branch. And then that means there's all sorts of integration problems and testing issues. Some teams don't even have continuous integration yet, or maybe they're just starting to figure out what that means. So it's inconsistent. The other end, the innovating teams, they include all kinds of validations to be release ready, from automated to human-centric testing, from non-functional to functional. They know what is tested in every environment. Most of it is probably automated, probably not all, depending on the context. They probably use, excuse me, things like feature toggles, or blue-green environments, or perform canary releases to help reduce the risk when they release to production to their teams. But as always, you're likely somewhere in between. Perhaps the teams have learned to merge more often, so there's less integration issues. Maybe they're running the unit tests on the continuous integration build, or maybe they're just starting to integrate with other teams more often, but they're not anywhere close to continuous delivery. Again, where are you? Where do you want to be? Not everyone wants to be practicing continuous deployment. So here's some example questions I might ask. I'm looking to see how people handle their pipeline, how stable their test environments are. Do they know where their testing actually goes? And you'd be surprised how many teams do not know these things. Now, what I encourage teams to do is to think about what their pipeline looks like. So start by drawing it, make it visible. Can the team draw it? Can they walk you through it? Do the team members understand it? I did this exercise a couple of weeks ago with a client, and it was amazing how much you learn when you draw it out. When you start walking through it, when you start asking questions. Think about what are human-centric testing, what is automated. You want to be looking at the bottlenecks, the wait times. Right? So Lisa, my co-author, told me about one of her experiences, and a particular kind of change in the pipeline required manual approval. It needed somebody to sign off. It couldn't go on until somebody went in and checked a box. People didn't notice that notification, and it started failing. And it took a while to figure out what was causing the failure. So you might want to think about how you could remove those manual approvals, or how you could set alerts so people don't forget about them. In theory, one of the superpowers of DevOps is that the delivery team owns the product start to finish, but that's not the case in every organization. So you want to think about where there might be implicit waits or miscommunication. I like to encourage to take one waste at a time. For example, merging issues. How can you change and adapt to remove that issue? It's not always easy, because I find that people don't always know what is possible, especially if they've been working in the same organization for 20 years. So start by understanding the process, and then maybe choose the tool to make it possible. I recently was talking to an organization that had an operations team that were there to make sure production was up all the time. They solved it immediately if they could. When I started asking more questions, it became apparent that the delivery team, the people who were managing this, would only become aware of an issue if it happened repeatedly and got to be a big issue. It had happened just like the week before I had gotten there, that their system crashed. There was too much load on the system. The delivery team did not know until that happened, but it had been happening for months. But the operations team is just restarting it all the time. How do you get that feedback? So testing is such a big part of the pipeline. So use your testers to help identify useful analytics or dependencies in the system, looking for those fast feedback loops. Use all of those people on the team. You have lots of multiple skill sets, so you really want to make that continuous delivery a reality. Now, I just want to switch gears. We've been on those three aspects. I want to talk a little bit about the culture, again, just a tiny little bit before I finish up. A team needs to look at the whole. Those individual silos, right? If we tried to think about only the developers were trying to fix only their stuff, it might be the wrong stuff. Because if you're not looking at that whole picture, maybe that's not the biggest bottleneck. Maybe you need to think about something different. So really optimize the whole. And this comes from Lean. Read more on Mary Poppendick's stuff. But you need to have that team looking at the whole instead of individual silo pieces. Really think about what that means to bring that quality in, to bring that commitment. And I really feel, I know that visualizing, getting something on a whiteboard or on a collaboration tool or anything makes it easier to talk about it. That continual learning won't happen unless we don't have a safe environment. And we hear a lot more talks about that these days. So diversity, how do we get together to make that? Because we can't experiment, we can't learn, we can't improve unless we have the ability and the confidence to be able to try. So we want to think about quality. I often say that if you focus on speed, the quality gets lost. But if you focus on quality, the speed will come because it gets easier and easier as you go through it. But I want to finish off this conversation with a little bit about trust. So my favorite story is in this picture. The girl on top is my granddaughter, and she's the most cautious person you ever met. One day I asked her, aren't these skills a little scary? And her answer was, maybe, but I trust my bases. That's the two girls that are holding her up. They won't let me fall. And if I do, they catch me. These girls were in this picture 14, 15, and 16. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our teams had that kind of trust in each other, or that kind of trust in their leaders, or the leaders trusted that teams? Now, if the managers don't trust your process, what is the underlying reason? Why don't they? Have you missed deliveries? Do they have insight into what the team is doing? I heard the other day that someone said their CTO wouldn't let them perform exploratory testing. I didn't understand that, but I wonder if it's because they didn't understand what it was or didn't understand the benefits. As a team, we can't convince them to change. So how do we give them that trust? How do we gain that trust? We have to show them. We have to be able to demonstrate and do it. And deliberate practice. We have to make sure that we build that trust. Katrina Clokey, in her book, Practical Testing for DevOps, I think puts it really wonderful. Build bridges, build pathways. There's no one right way to build trust because each context is different, each team is different, each product is different. And no matter what I've learned over the last year is that no matter how much I talk, no matter how much I prove and try to show facts, I cannot convince people if they don't want to hear the message. They must be ready to receive it. And so this quote was really powerful to me. Never underestimate the power of planting a seed. I was talking to a CEO. I had done an assessment for them. And I told him that he needed to change something. His first reaction was, I can't change that. That's the way we do business. It's the way our product has to be. And so I just left it at that because I knew that no matter what I did, I wouldn't be able to convince him. But 2 weeks later, we were doing a different exercise and I presented the same information in a different way. That same CEO said, what if we do it this way? I had planted the seeds, bided my time, and they were ready to hear. And I encourage you to do that. So listen to what your peers say. Think about what you're saying. Do you use blame language? Do you know how you contribute to your quality of the products? Do you know what your leaders need from you? What problems they're trying to solve? Have you had that quality conversation? Or do you still create those same metrics you always did? And be courageous. Ask those hard questions of your leaders. And trust that they are doing the best job they can. I've always been a believer of managing upwards. So I encourage you to trust yourself, but trust your influence because it starts with you. One small change can have huge ripple effects. So here's some more reading. And I know this is being recorded, so this will be there. You can take a snapshot. But I also encourage you to send me emails, tweet to me. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. You can look me up in all kinds of different places. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll have some, as Tristan said, informal Q&A.
Oh my goodness. Okay, round of applause in the chat, y'all. This was incredible. Yes. This was incredible. Oh, this is the masterclass.
Thank you.
Today, Janet. This is the masterclass that I needed. Oh, okay. Let me stop my fangirl moment for a second. Yes, to anyone who's watching this recording, we'll be sure to share all of these resources after for you all. I want to do a quick shout out for one of the resources you mentioned as well. Wood Heuristic is also in a deck card game.
It is.
So you can have some fun offline.
Yes.
With that said, we had some questions in the chat, y'all. So I just kind of want to dive in because I know we only have 10 minutes. Janet, there's a few questions that came up. One of them, though, came from someone very special. Anne, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Don't hate me, Anne. I used to teach at community college. Spoiler alert. Did you feel like asking your question to Janet live?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. So I was curious as to what are some great examples that you've seen of what testing looks like when it's properly visible? As in, have you seen folks using a certain tool that helps elevate that? Maybe is it talking about testing in certain meetings? Just, I figured you have probably seen some great things that you could share.
Yeah, I've seen some great things. I've seen some really bad things too. But depending on where you are, if you're in person, I would try to make it, put it up on the board, on the walls, making it visible. These days with remote, I want to try to keep it as simple as possible. So I will ask, so for example, if I had a story and we were using whatever tool you want to use, I won't mention any, because the one that's the most well used is not necessarily the one I like the best, but get the testing activities as part of that. So it will be, for example, I don't want to have a whole lot of different tasks that say, 20 different things, but I want to have a checklist maybe at some point to say, have we talked about, we decided that performance, security, and accessibility were our three most important quality attributes. So I want to have those in a checklist, maybe on each and every story to say, have we talked about this? Do we have to consider security for this story? How are we going to code it in? I want to elevate the conversation so that it's thought about all the way through. I use things like mind maps to get the whole team to talk about testing. Anything that we can do to create that conversation. As long as one tester sits in their corner and creates all of the testing activities, nobody else sees it and it's invisible. I know that that's not a perfect answer, but it depends on each individual team.
Thank you. I'm also curious to what are the bad examples since you've mentioned
I won't go there. I'll leave that one alone. Catch me offline.
I will say, Anne, highly, I'm sure you already are, but like Janet is all over social media with her resources. And I would love for you to also check out our Agile Testing Fellowship, because I'm sure there's some more amazing stuff in there. I will also make a shameless plug for a book, and I can drop this in the chat as well. It's called Making Work Visible, Exposing Time Theft to Optimize Work and Flow by Dominica de Grandes. I'm obsessed with this book, y'all. I bought 5 copies and gave them to all of my friends. So when you're thinking about what does collaboration look like in an increasingly remote and distributed team workforce, I highly recommend how you can help create additional cultural capital within your quality organizations for not just increasing collaboration effectively, but also highlighting some of your wins, because small wins make for big changes, right? So I highly recommend this. I know we are limited on time, but Janet, there was a question, and I think we touched on just a little bit. This was in the chat. Deji, are you there?
Hey, Tristan. Yes, I am.
Yes, yes. You had a great question from, which kind of led into a little bit of some of the other DMs I'm getting. Do you feel like asking me that live?
Sure, thanks. So I wanted to find out from Janet, what would you say is the perfect or semi-perfect organization that you've worked with, if you can share? And also, what would be some examples that would excite you from a picture of success perspective?
Oh, those are okay. The second one's a really difficult question. I hadn't thought about that. The first one, I'm going to use an example of a team. It was a while ago that I was working in, and I think the reason why I like this one was because the team, one of our biggest customers said, your quality sucks, your process quality sucks. So we had a sense of urgency. We had to fix it or they were leaving. And so as a team, we devised ways to work together. I was brought in as a kind of an agile coach class / tester / lead. But what we started doing was thinking about it. What could the developers do to help? So they started doing extreme programming, but what could us as testers do to help? So we started doing a lot more collaboration. We started doing a lot more making things visible. So we did lots of things wrong at the start, but every time we did something wrong, we'd say, what can we do now? It was open. There was no blame. We would just try something new. If it worked, great. If it didn't work, we would adjust. And to me, it took about 1.5 years to get the quality where we wanted it to be. But at that end of the 1.5 years, I had our customers, I did a UAT with our customers, and they were extremely thrilled. They were extremely happy. And I think the reason was because of the collaboration of the team, including the management, the trust that our manager gave us, all of those things. So I often ask a question and I'll say, how many have felt the magic of being on a highly successful team? Right? And people that put up their hands right away know what I'm talking about. They've felt it. They've been there. The people that kind of go like this, they're close. They're close. They know they can almost see it, but they're not quite there. But I get a majority of people that just, what? They have no idea what I'm talking about. That magic is what that really highly successful team looks like. And you just feel it, you know it. But it's when everybody collaborates and works really well together and constantly improving. Doesn't mean you're really good to start with, but are you on that trajectory?
Mm-hmm. I think that was well said. And Deji also as well, and anyone who's watching this recording and or live, Donkey and Goats is an amazing short YouTube session. Sorry, Donkey and Dragons.
I was going to say goats.
No, that we'll add them in as a celebrity cast maybe at one point. But some amazing short and easily digestible videos for y'all to check out as well from Janet and our Lisa Crispin. I wanted to just say as well too, one other thing that I'm thinking about too, Janet, is, you know, when we're going back to this remote work era and we're thinking about how we can empower the humans that are leveraging these tools and strategies, lean into your organizations and think about, what does asynchronous communication look like in your organization, right? It's little things. Maybe you're using Microsoft Teams or Slack. Like, what does public praise look like? What do celebrating small wins look like? Are you communicating in the right channels? Are you using that human-centric approach to encourage more people to collaborate? It's not always going to be in one of these types of live virtual sessions. So I think that's just something I've been thinking a lot about. That said, Janet, I know we're about to wrap up. There is someone here who I hope they're still here. Sud, are you on the line?
Yeah, hey, I'm here.
Yes, I wanted you to meet Janet. I wanted you to meet Sud. Sud is just such an incredible leader and someone I really look up to. And Sud, if you have any questions, one last one as we close. Janet is all here for you. Or any comments.
Oh, thank you. So this session is really awesome, and I'm fan of Janet. So I think I'm learning a lot of things here. Really, this is really good.
Thank you.
One question: how Janet will resolve conflict between QA and dev team?
That ever-loving conflict. So you know that picture I showed of my granddaughter, there's no conflict. Well, actually, they do have conflict, but it's healthy conflict. My granddaughter will say, you're holding your hand wrong. I can't balance this way, but she'll be able to tell them. So they get together. It takes a long time to get that. I think that each, and I've been in a very unhealthy, antagonistic team. And so I understand how sometimes that can get really, really bad. I'm sorry, it's one of those traumatic experiences that I never want to go back to. And it's why I spend my life trying to get rid of it. But getting the conversation open, to be able to say, here's how I can help you. And then programmers, how can I help you? So from a leadership's perspective, one of my worst nightmare moments of my life is one day I was having a conversation. It was not a conversation. And this was not in an agile environment ever, but I was having this conversation with my development manager. I was QA manager, and it got to be loud. It got to be very loud. And I'm 5'2", he's 6 foot. And so I don't think it was very pleasant, but I was not backing down. I refused to back down because it was important to me. Our manager, please, managers in this room, never ever do this. Our manager came in and he said, you are scaring the developers. Closed the door and walked out. Ask me how much trust I had in that manager after that day. None. I lost every bit of trust. So the same thing goes with testers and developers. How can you get them together and have an open conversation to say, how can they contribute to each other? And as leaders, how can you make that happen? Please don't shut the door and say, work it out yourself, because that does not work. I handed my resignation in the next day. So don't do that. How can you make that? So I think a leader needs to provide the environment, the soil, the fertilizer. How do they make it safe for those people to work together? And there's lots of little tips to do from a one-on-one, but really it comes down to that.
Thank you so much for that. And so as well, highly encourage you to check out more resources, and all of y'all who are watching from are Janet and Lisa Crispin. And there was so much in the thread when you just said that. Hearing from John, Janet, one thing to remember is when it comes to looking at examples of successful organizations, you need to look at what made them successful, rather than just the fact that who they are. Every org is different, every team is different.
Absolutely.
So take those learnings and apply them in your own unique situation. Anna's chiming in saying, thank you so much, great session. Same for Deji saying, great session. Key takeaways for me is that what you do to contribute to the quality of product or service, a question everyone in the organization should be involved with. Oh my God, yes. Oh
Tristan, can I ask you a favor? Because I couldn't read all of the chat. I would love to read the chat. Thank you.
This to you. And I know that we're 2 minutes past the hour and you've been so generous. Colin, Janet, do you have time for just one last?
Sure. I have nothing else planned right now.
Oh, I love you. Colin. You're used to this, Colin.
Wow, he was ready to dip and be done.
Nope.
Yeah, I wasn't really prepped. I mean, the thing that I really took in my notes as I was going was working with your team to know what to test. That's what I think my devs that I work with struggle with the most. Is they feel very, very comfortable with their unit testing itself, but like the moment you get outside of that one little line of code, they feel completely lost. So like, can you maybe give an example of a circumstance like that where you've kind of coached a team through that?
So my very first Agile team, I had when I walked in, I was the first tester. They were doing extreme programming, and one of the programmers walked up to me and said, and I tell this story lots, and he said, "So we're doing extreme programming. We're doing all our own testing. You're a tester. What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, let's figure it out together, right?" And my favorite moment of that whole year I was there was because I did the show me's that I was talking about and different things. And they were really doing a lot of their own testing. But when I would do the show me's, I would ask questions and things that they hadn't thought about doing their own unit testing. And so my moment of extreme yes was I was walking behind, they always paired, by the way. And I was walking behind a pair and they didn't see me, just kind of cutting through. And I heard one of the programmers say to the other one, "Are we ready to check in?" And that programmer, and that was the same one that asked me the question, said, "Not quite yet. I have to do my Janet tests first." And I went, yes. So even by doing something as simple as just asking questions when we were doing a show me, a pairing, got them to think about testing at different levels. It was just kind of one of those little moments that is in my head forever. When I get down, I think about that.
And I love that too. And one of the other things to think about as well, in addition to that, is think about what is the culture for your team. I hear this so often when it comes to, I think Caleb, he's out there, he has a mascot for his team. It is a,
Cool.
right? Yeah, it's what is that? Well, I forget. We'll talk about him. He has a mascot for his team and they have named it. And it's something outside of themselves, for themselves and the whole team. So this is a great example, whether you're remote and or in person, a hybrid, get creative with how you can connect with others.
Absolutely.
Right? And have some fun too, because work should always be fun, even when it's not. With that said as well, there's so much more conversation we could have as well. My boss is going to murder me, but kiki offline is what I'm going to say, because we are out of time and you are busy doing God's work. And so I just wanted to say, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We'll be sure to share all the resources from today, post-event, as well as this recording. Janet, why are you so amazing?
Thank you. What can I say to that?
We love you. We love you so much. And thank you for kicking off our Provar Community.
Okay. Good luck with it. I hope it's very successful. I'm sure it will be.
We are not worried about that because we've got leaders like you sharing knowledge. So please continue the conversation. If you love this recording on social media, if you love Janet, tag her. And there's so many more resources from her and from all of us here in the Provar community to you. We're wishing you, your loved ones, and your teams to continue to improve a more holistic testing approach for your DevOps mindsets and teams. With that said, Janet, thank you so much. And to all of you,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.